Good evening. I believe that a worthwhile idea is one that stands up to scrutiny. I also believe that it's an individual's responsibility as an intellectual and a model citizen to challenge the ideas of others and have theirs challenged in turn. Voltaire put this far more eloquently than I could have hoped to. He said, "I disapprove of what you say, but will defend to the death your right to say it." Recently, however, this concept has come under fire, and as a result, it is my major claim that contemporary progressivism is incompatible with the Western tenets of rationalism and liberalism. I will prove this through my two secondary claims. First, that progressives use speech policing and social shaming to silence individuals who criticize their philosophies. And second, that rationalism, scientific rigor, and skepticism are less valued than emotional thinking and political correctness in the progressive sphere. I also want to define liberalism as a political philosophy that supports ideas of liberty, equality, and individualism, such as freedom of speech, freedom of the press, democratic societies, civil rights, etc. And I also want to define contemporary progressivism as a political and social philosophy that supports ideas of collectivism and government intervention. An example of this speech policing can be found on colleges and campuses across the US and UK. The online magazine Spiked compiled data from 2015 and 2016 of UK campuses that banned speech in some way, and found that 90% of all the campuses in the United Kingdom have banned free speech. Commonly banned topics include transgenderism, Israel, atheism, Islam, abortion, and lab culture. In 2010, in 2010, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, or FIRE, found that 71% of US colleges maintain speech codes that would be considered unconstitutional under the First Amendment. And a more recent example of this would be last July, when our own university announced a settlement agreement with Nicholas Thomas, a student who sued the campus after he was told he needed a permit to hand out flyers on a public sidewalk. An example of social shaming can be seen in the case of George Lawler, a student of Warwick University who has come under fire by his peers after he posted a picture of himself captioned, "This is not what a rapist looks like," in response to his university's invitation to sexual consent workshops. Afterwards, he faced a barrage of beratement by his peers. He was labeled a racist, a misogynist, and a rapist, and has been ostracized and threatened on and off campus. Recently, he said that he fears for his future and he has stopped attending lectures because of the perceived threats that he faces. Another form of speech policing used by progressives is changing the definitions and nature of hate speech and harassment in order to cover speech that is merely argumentative or contradictory in nature. Gregory Alan Elliott is a recent victim of this trend. Feminist activist Stephanie Guthrie and two of her friends charged Elliott with criminal harassment after he continually criticized their actions and statements on their Twitter accounts. Recently, however, it was found that Elliott was not guilty of criminal harassment, and that Guthrie and her friends may have conspired to criminally harass Elliott and commit mischief against him. Glenn Greenwald in The Guardian in 2013 wrote that he is most baffled by the unbelievable hubris of censorship advocates. He writes that they believe so much that their ideals are correct that they cannot fathom that their ideas will ever be censored in the future. To summarize my first evidence, speech policing and social shaming to stamp out dissent are completely contradictory to liberal values and rational logical debate. My second claim, that progressives favor political correctness and emotion over rationalism and scientific rigor and skepticism, are supported by the following evidence. First, that the trend of labeling materials with trigger warnings or censoring it on the grounds that some individuals may be adversely affected by it goes against accepted medical practice in regards to helping people with anxiety disorders and PTSD. The National Center for Health found that avoidance is a maladaptive control strategy resulting in the maintenance of perceived constant threat. Exposure to safe but anxiety-provoking stimulus is actually a treatment for sufferers of anxiety disorders and PTSD. The individuals who use trigger warnings feel that they are protecting the health of others, but they end up enabling their avoidance and anxieties. In addition, progressive transgender activists contradict and ignore established medical treatments and new studies about transgenderism, and instead offer emotionally based advice. Dr. Paul R. McHugh former psychiatrist-in-chief for Johns Hopkins Hospital, said that transgenderism is a mental disorder that merits medical treatment. He has noted studies from Vanderbilt University of children who have expressed transgender feelings, but over time, 70 to 80% of these children spontaneously lost these feelings. He warns against enabling or encouraging young transgender individuals as they are incredibly susceptible to suggestion and influence and have the most to lose when it comes to gender reassignment surgery. He also compares transgenderism as a disorder of assumption similar to anorexia, where sufferers assume they are overweight regardless of their own physical state. And finally, many details about the negative aspects of the refugee crisis in Europe are being withheld for fear of political and social backlash. The German newspaper Welt am Sonntag revealed that police had identified 71 of the attackers in the Cologne New Year's Eve attacks. However, police chief Wolfgang Albers claimed that they had no intelligence on the criminals, who turned out to be mostly Syrian refugees. Albers allegedly withheld this information because he said it would have been politically awkward to release it. Earlier this year, a massive sexual assault allegedly committed by refugees was covered up by police officials because it may have played into the hands of their political opponents. The attacks occurred at a music festival in Sweden, and according to internal police reports, is a recurring problem with the refugees in Sweden. These are only a handful of the examples that progressives favor political correctness and emotion. To conclude, many of the political and social actions taken by contemporary progressivists, as well as their philosophies, are completely incompatible with the Western ideals of rationalism and liberalism. Thank you.
All right, Anthony, you cite the proposition pretty clearly. I like the definitions that you provided at the beginning to clarify where you're going with the argument. I think there's plenty of controversy here, and like I said, there's a good preview of what the supporting structure is. When you get to the supporting structure, you don't really remind us of what the first point was, but you do summarize it when you get to the end of that first point, and then you have a very good transition to the second point, which was easy to follow. I do think you need to explain a little bit more why the examples that you picked out support your second point. They feel a little bit disconnected, although I do think that there is a relationship there. It got to be a little clearer toward the end of that section where there was an explanation about maybe why some of the information was being withheld, but I'm not exactly sure, for instance, on the transgender issue, that you give an explanation about why it fits into the categories that you're talking about. I thought you had good examples that you cited, lots of good testimony. That was especially valuable in your argument. You're very consistent about citing the sources on that particular information. And I thought that was fine. If I'm just listening to you, where are you? You're there. If I'm just listening to you, it sounds pretty solid, but when I'm watching you, there's a lot of reading going on. So that's something that you would want to work on. Probably a little bit more practice would help there. All right, thank you.